An antique brass model steam engine. This one's part 2. Machining the piston groove, fitting some Teflon coated yarn, adjusting the big end brasses and making gaskets. Owing to age and lack of oil, the piston was in a bit of a mess. The only thing that saved the cylinder from being scored was the fact that there was some graphited yarn around this piston. You can see the score marks around the edge of the piston, but I think because the cylinder is made from cast brass, this must be harder than the ordinary brass, and thankfully the cylinder avoided the oil starvation very well. Over now to ye old Boxford lathe, and I'm going to fit the piston in the chuck and rotate it while simultaneously cleaning out the groove with the parting tool. Once I started cleaning the groove with the parting tool, I noticed that the groove itself was not in the centre of the piston. And the piston rod is not in the centre of the piston, but I'm not going to mess about with this because it's the way the engine's been for many years. The idea is not to remanufacture this engine, it's a sympathetic restoration. And I want to use as many of the original parts as possible. At this stage I made the decision to remachine the groove, so at least it was in the middle in alignment with the piston rod. The original piston is a bit of a rattle fit in the cylinder anyway. I could of course fit a silicone O-ring, but I'm not going to do that, because if ever that gets run without oil, it's not going to last very long. When I spoke to the owner originally about this engine, I asked whether he'd lubricated the cylinder, and he said no, he'd never done that, so I'm not surprised that everything's a bit worn in there. I now have a choice. I can use some graphited yarn like this, wound around the groove, which would be perfectly adequate, and this is a piece of old-style graphited yarn, nothing like the stuff we buy today, which I really do not like. Instead, I'm going to use some of this stuff. This is a piece of braided Teflon yarn. First of all, I give it a coating of steam oil, and then I tap the braided yarn into the groove. And once I get all the way round to the end, I cut it to length. Once the piston is in the cylinder, this Teflon coated yarn will seal it perfectly. Which leads me to the next part of the video, fitting the piston into the cylinder. It's actually quite a tight fit. You mustn't do this. Here I'm demonstrating what not to do by using a Stanley knife blade. This is a totally unsuitable tool for the job. Not only will it damage the Teflon coated yarn, it could damage the piston or the cylinder, or you may even cut yourself. You don't need a special tool like a piston ring compressor, just a cable tie like this. Pull the cable tie tight around the graphited yarn, and then using a soft piece of metal, this is a copper tube, tap the piston into place. Simple, cheap and effective, just like a girlfriend I once had. Initially the piston is quite a snug fit in the bore, this is what I need it to be. Now it's time to fasten the piston rod back to the crosshead. When tightening screws, make sure the screwdriver is in the centre of the slot, not like this. This is much better. And the piston rod is re-secured to the crosshead in exactly the same place as it was in the first place. Time now to look at the big end brasses. Before I start this job though, please be aware that this is a brass engine. These are not gunmetal brasses, they're actually made from brass. And brass does not wear very well, it's not suitable for bearing surfaces. Any speculation that this engine is an apprentice piece for powering a small workshop is complete nonsense. It looks to me like an engine supplied by either Bassett Loke or Stevens Model Dockyard that was machined by an amateur in a home workshop many years ago. These big end brasses are mainly worn in an end-to-end direction. I'm rubbing each of the brasses in turn for quite a long time on a piece of 400 grit wet-to-dry sandpaper using some oil as a lubricant. This took quite a while, a lot longer than you see here. Some viewers may be thinking, well, how do I know how much metal to remove? Well, I don't know really. I'm just doing what feels right. I've done this many times. Sometimes I use my 1-inch belt sander in severe cases. I think it's one of these things that's down to experience. The more you do something, the better you get at it, well, usually. After removing some metal from each end of the brasses on a piece of wet-to-dry sandpaper, I thoroughly cleaned the parts. The big end brasses are now serviceable. There's still a bit of play that I've left on purpose. Once again, this is a brass engine, and I do not want the big end brasses to be too tight in this application. Time now for a bit of gasket making. This is the material I'm going to use. And this is a whole new technique to me. I saw it on John Mills's Double Boost channel. where he actually cut the gasket on the end of a cylinder with a ball peen hammer. I don't really want to do that because this is a brass engine. But at least this gentle hammering leaves a perfect imprint of the end of the cylinder on the gasket paper, as you can clearly see here. In my videos over the years I've made a great deal of gaskets and I've videoed them, so if you're not sure fully how to do this, please watch some more videos. I've shortened this sequence, but if you watch it, you get the idea. Now it's time to refit the end cylinder cover complete with the gasket, and here I'm cleaning up the ends of the studs because they were just as they were sawn, very rough. I'm being very careful with this. It's a cutting wheel in my Proxxon motor tool. For a while at least the ends will be shiny, but they'll soon go dull, and it's far better than looking at the rough sawn ends of the studs. The time has come to work on the steam chest. The scoring of the port face is negligible, so I'm not going to do anything with this. It's basically fine. But I am going to do something about the valve. There are one or two things wrong with this slide valve. The valve rod is actually slotted, which fits into the slot on the slide valve. The trouble is though, the slot is a little bit tight, so here using a needle file I'm enlarging the slot in the slide valve. Here's the valve rod in the top gland fitting and the slide valve. I cleaned up the valve rod using a wire brush in my bench mounted Proxxon motor tool. I've unpicked some of this braided Teflon yarn, and I'm going to use one strand of this and wrap it round the valve rod. Time for a bit of an obvious tip here. When you're doing this job, make sure that the gland part is fitted to the valve spindle before you wind the gland packing around the valve rod. I've fitted just enough valve packing to leave a bit of a gap between the end part and the main body. Once the nuts are tightened and then backed off a little bit, everything should be fine. Time now to make a pair of gaskets for the valve chest. But that is going to be in the third and final episode. Stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.